let's talk about Britain not working, because that's what Keir Starmer says. Alain Tolhurst is here. Alan, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
They're going to try and revamp the welfare system. It's been tried many times before, and the only result seems to be it's a bit like the bonfire of the quangos. You end up with more quangos. You know, whenever they try and reform the welfare benefit system, they seem to end up with more people on benefits.
Yeah, you're right. It does seem as though kind of the same things are being said, the same things that are being said by the previous government and the previous government before that. It's basically not a huge change from anything that I've heard from any government this century, really. But I think the difference is that the situation is perhaps more acute now than it ever has been. I think there's something like 9 million people are out of work.
Yes.
That's double what it was before the pandemic. 2.3 million people on long-term sickness. And a shocking statistic shows that actually I think the welfare bill for long-term sickness is going to go up to something like £100 billion by the end of this parliament. That's more than like schools, courts and police budgets all put together. So it's a real issue that this government has got to grapple if it wants to get the economy growing as they talk about.
Right. But it's already looking as though they're sort of watering it down even as we speak. You know, we're supposed to be having Liz Kendall unveiling all of this coming up today, later on, because the white paper is going to be kind of introduced to Parliament. But it already, according to some of the papers that I've seen this morning, it's already looking as though they're not going to quite attract the business that they want to attract. They're not going to go for the people who are off sick, suffering from anxiety, because it's too tricky.
Yeah, but I think it's partly because I think for these programs to work, it's kind of the carrot and the stick. The carrot is obviously sending more people to work in job centres, sending people from the NHS to help people get back to work. But the other element of it is kind of the stick, which is that people are often threatened with benefits being taken away or benefits reform as the other half of it. That has gone out to consultation that won't be around until next year. So there's a fear, I think, from some people that actually only by doing half of it straight away, it's not going to have the desired effect that if you did both of them at the same time. But I think for the government, obviously, you know, changing people's benefits is actually a very complicated process. So I do understand why they're leaving it till later and they want to get this stuff out of the way first. But it does, as you say, lead to these accusations that they're not quite going to get the results they need unless they do both of those, both angles of it. Right.
Well, the difficulty is, isn't it, that people seem to be moving from one, say, benefit to another. An awful lot of people who might end up currently on, say, for example, out of work benefit because they're suffering long-term sick, might get moved off that, but then they'll move to another benefit, so the actual saving will be zero.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's that kind of that reform of all the benefit system, moving. As anyone who's trying to navigate the benefit system knows, it's incredibly complicated, and you end up in these different kind of silos. Then moved into the next part, and lots of the different halves of it don't talk to each other. So you end up kind of in this cycle. And there are lots of people, as your caller mentioned, who want to work, who find it very difficult, and that there is that support to get people back into work. I think it is really, really needed, and I think actually could do a huge amount of good. But there does need to be the reform of the other side of it as well to make sure it's easier. And as we've seen, obviously, the CBI conference yesterday, there is criticism of the government that they've made it harder for employers to take on new employees with these increases in taxes. And they're saying that's exactly the wrong thing to be doing. If you're trying to get people back into work, you're making it harder for employers to take on new employees.
Absolutely right. And of course, some people have said to me today, when we have these conversations about, you know, why do people not want to go to work, it's too easy for an awful lot of people to be on benefits. It's too difficult for them to leave benefits, because if they do get a job, if it's not particularly well paid, they're worse off. And there's not much point in working. Others have said, well, why should we work when we see all these people coming into the country from overseas, illegal migrants coming here, getting free stuff and getting hotels and getting, you know, paid to be around. And this morning, one of the big stories I'm talking about is in the Times. Ministers are going to announce millions of pounds in extra funding for lawyers to represent asylum seekers to help clear a large backlog of appeals that is blocking efforts to move migrants out of hotels. It seems as though lawyers are not being paid enough money, effectively, with legal aid to represent enough migrants, and so there is this kind of backlog. But it looks to me as though they're just going to basically wave them all in. They're just going to go, well, we're not going to deport anybody, we're just going to grant everybody asylum who wants it.
Well, obviously that would be the quickest way of dealing with this problem, and actually in the end probably the cheapest, because you talked about people come to this country getting, you know, benefits. Actually, most people who come to this country awaiting an asylum decision have no recourse to any public funds. They're not allowed to work, and that's why it's costing.
No, but that's not quite true though, because they do get benefits. What they don't get is access to the actual benefit system, but they do get paid money. They get paid cash.
They get an allowance.
They get an allowance, so that is a benefit, and people see that, and it's a benefit in kind. In fact, only last week we were talking about how the London Assembly is also considering whether or not they should give asylum seekers freedom of passage on London transport, so they can basically, go around on buses and trains in London for free.
Yeah, I mean, the idea was obviously that would help them go to their asylum appointments, that sort of stuff. But
well, it would help a lot of people get to their appointments, but, we have to pay.
That's true. Yeah. But I think you're right. It's the cost, I think, of having these people in kind of limbo, essentially. We know that how long it's been taking. Some people are waiting months, almost years, to have their asylum decision processed, and all the while it's kind of costing everyone in the system, and no one's really benefiting from it. So yeah, I think clearing that backlog, although expensive in the short term, paying for those extra lawyers, I think the government knows that it would be cheaper in the long term. It's just what effect that would have on as you say, as a pull factor, drawing more people if they think actually the decision might be made.
I mean, if you get granted asylum in this country, I'm not sure what happens next. I mean, do you then get given accommodation? Do you then get given the right to work? Do you then get given the right to have benefits? Because it's not, the government doesn't really ever explain that. And I'm assuming if you become a successful asylum seeker, you have access to all of those things.
Actually, you don't have access to a lot of the benefits for quite a long time. I think you have the right to work. You can end up, and that's what people want, is the ability to work, and obviously that helps kind of with buy-in and stuff. People, you come in and you're able to work and you can pay taxes and all that kind of stuff. That's a good thing. Actually, a long time, it takes a while to get. You're not given, although some people do think this is the case, you're not given kind of, on top of the list for housing and that sort of stuff. I think the big
but they must be housed somewhere, though. Surely that means that they must be given housing.
Well, I think you'll find actually that they tend not to be really. Actually, there's a lot of people who end up being, homeless. I'm not talking about rough sleeping, but homeless, not having a permanent home, who end up through the asylum process. Yeah, it does happen an awful lot. It's things like, obviously, if you have things like children, then you're more likely to get housing, and obviously access to schools.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. The principle is basically that if you come here and you seek asylum and you get asylum, you then get given accommodation, you then get the right to work, you then get the right to claim benefits, etc., etc. And that's what annoys people. That's what people get fed up with.
Right, but we don't. I mean, if someone comes to this country and wants to work and contributes to the economy, that's not something that we would necessarily be against as a country. We're not against immigration overall. Is that?
Well, no, we're against illegal immigration overall, I would say, and even the Labour Party are against it. I mean, the Labour government is saying they want to stop it. They're saying they want to deport people, but they're not deporting anyone. They're now saying they're going to look at the backlog and they're going to clear the backlog, which, by my estimation, means they're going to just allow everybody in.
Well, I think you're right. There could be certainly a large increase. I think the problem for most people, when you talk about immigration specialists on this, is that there aren't safe legal routes for people to come to this country. So therefore, people
that's not true either. Yeah, I'm an immigration specialist. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. And I can tell you every single wrinkle that every single immigration lawyer will tell you. And the fact is that part of the reason that we have a problem in this country with people who don't want to work is I think they look around and they say, "Why should I bother? I'm going to work on minimum wage. I'm better off just being unemployed."
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that as an argument. I don't necessarily think that the facts bear that out, and certainly the numbers overall, illegal migration, although it has been much higher than it has been in previously, it still represents a very small fraction of society overall. Actually, a very small fraction of legal migration as well. And I think maybe sometimes those two things are elided.
Our population has risen by 10 million over the last 10 or so years, right? And yet we have a falling birth rate. How do you explain that without there being massive immigration statistics?
Well, I'm saying legal migration. That's the thing, is that legal migration.
All the migration.
Yeah, but legal migration is 10 times that of illegal migration. I think that often when people talk about these issues that you're mentioning, actually what they're referring to is legal migration, but it gets lumped in with illegal migration.
It's all the same, because it's all the same thing at the end of the day. If you've got too many people in the country, which I believe we do, one of the reasons for that is you've got so many people come into the country, whether legally or illegally. And the point is that the government says they're going to try and bring it down, but they're not doing anything about it. There's no point in sitting here being all virtuous about how lovely we think immigration is. It's not. It's ruined the country. There's no question about that.
Well, if you say so, I don't necessarily think that migration...
Well, you can disagree with me if you want, Alan, but, the point is, at the end of the day, we have got more people living here by 10 million than we used to have, and we've got a falling birth rate, which has changed the way that Britain now looks, and it's changed the way that Britain operates, and it's changed the way that the country is. And so we've now got 9 million people who are basically economically ineffective, economically inactive, as the government calls them, and yet we've got 10 million people who have come here extra. The whole thing has gone to pot, hasn't it?
Well, as a product of migration myself. My mum came to this country legally, I must say. You know, I don't think that necessarily that migration has made this country worse. I think that migration has made this country better in lots of ways, but I do understand a lot of the problems because I think it's enriched the country. A lot of the good, yeah, I think so. A lot of the good things that happen because of migration and the kind of transposing of different cultures and the mixing of cultures. We are a multicultural society. You would agree, and there are lots of things.
Well, that's fine, but you know, it was always a multicultural society. Here's a figure for you: record numbers of migrants living in Britain are now jobless. More than 1.6 million are unemployed. So that's not really that's not an improvement in the state of the nation, is it?
No.
We're importing people to be unemployed. It's not a good idea.
No.
Is it?
No, I'm not suggesting that our migration system is perfect. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily think that migration
it's very far
overall
from perfect.
is a bad thing.
It's costing us an estimated £8 billion a year. So
yeah, it's the failures of successive governments to tackle it, basically, because I think being squeamish on tackling some of these issues around things like integration, all that kind of stuff, countries have been able to do it.
Because people say things like, oh, but immigration's good. Well, some immigration is good, and of course it is.
Yeah.
You know, I'm very happy that your mother brought you here. You know, and you're a very splendid addition to our society and the gayness of life in general. But that's not, you know, that's not the same for everybody, I'm afraid. And so we have to be able to delineate and be sensible and have grown-up conversations about the fact that not all immigration is good.
No, and I think that's not a conversation that isn't being had. I just think that the problem is that successive governments have found it very difficult to actually act on these kind of stuff.
Yes,
they decide
because they've been, as you say, they've been squeamish about it.
Yeah, and if you look at things like, you know, this government came in saying they were going to change things on illegal migration, and again, you know, kind of that three-word slogan again, smash the gangs. Well, you know, how effective has that been? How effective can it be?
I would say it hasn't been effective at all.
Right, and same with
apart from arresting that bloke from Turkey, who was apparently to blame for all of it.
Right, but then as soon as he gets arrested, I'm sure someone else will pop up because there continue to be people from countries like, you know, from countries that are suffering, you know, devastating kind of civil wars and persecution. People are always going to want to leave those countries and move to other prosperous
Well, that's another one for you. The people coming here from other countries other than Eritrea, pretending to be from Eritrea, where there's a civil war, and the government are going, oh, OK, you must be from Eritrea, you better come in. But they don't know they're from Eritrea because they don't ask them actually for any passports or any kind of documents. It's mad. The whole thing's mad. Anyway, I didn't know we were going to go down this road, but there we are.
That's all right.
Alan, thank you very much indeed. Far more interesting than talking about Keir Starmer. Thank you.